Generally, when we buy a Switch controller that's third party, most times we're pretty much sacrificing some sort of feature. A lot of times it tends to be the NFC in these controllers that just don't work with Amiibos, for example. And a lot of times that just gets left out. Rumble's been left out, right? That's something that's been left out, gyro controls. But I actually found a controller that has everything. In fact, that technically has more functionality even than like the actual Pro controller. Let's check this one out. This is actually called the Star Player wireless controller for the Switch. It's $30 and it's available on Amazon through Prime shipping, and I have a link below if you want to check it out. Let's see what this thing can do. All right, so I guess we'll start with an unboxing of this guy. Now, I've been using it for a bit, but this is generally what you'll be getting. There's a USB-C cable in here, and that does charge it, which is good to see USB-C is still being used completely by these third-party companies, as of course that is the preferred way to charge these things now that we're used to it on Switch controllers. And I hope that the other console manufacturers from Sony and Microsoft get into that as well, where we have USB-C across the board. It's just an overall superior port and plug-in. Let's actually take a look at the controller, though. It's done in this like styrofoam bag material. And the controller itself looks okay. You know, it kind of has this weird material here. It's just a bunch of dots that I think is supposed to be grippy, but it's in a weird spot. Like, I use it like this, right? And I guess it's for your palms, but for the most part, the material down here is not going to be used at all, just because of kind of the way it's set up there. Your palms aren't really going to be hitting that, so it's kind of up here, away from it. I guess it kind of is in use, but it seems like they overdid it here for something you're not going to use. Like, they probably could have just done like this half of it, and it would have been fine. They probably didn't have to go crazy and do all of it, but, well, they did. So looking around the controller, we have A, B, X, Y in the standard setup there. It's kind of this translucent buttons and colors. The only issue I have is A and B are actually very difficult to see in person. You don't really get a good look at it. And going between like something like the Xbox and the Switch, A and B of course are reversed, so you might accidentally start hitting the wrong button. Sometimes it's good just to be able to look down and see them for people if you're going between the two systems. They probably didn't have to do this weird dark blue and then light blue. They probably could have done all light blue and it would have been fine. In the middle we have our home button, our snapshot button, minus, plus, and then a turbo button that does allow you to use basically these buttons as a rapid press just by kind of holding it. And you basically hold the turbo button down and press a button, and at that point it will start working. Analog sticks are tight, not as tight as the controller we looked at very recently, but they're pretty good. It's a slightly looser, I would say, than the Switch Pro controller in terms of its dead zone, but the tension is higher, so it does have a nice push when you move it around. It doesn't feel very cheap. The D-pad could be better. I mean, you could press pretty much everything at once. It rolls slightly, but you can kind of hear me pressing the whole thing down. There's not a lot stopping it. But it definitely isn't as bad as a tactile one. This is, at least in terms of feel, like a rubber membrane that does at least accept rolls. So the D-pad is serviceable, but definitely not one of the best ones I've seen. I don't think it's worse than the Switch Pro controller's D-pad. That's kind of hard to do, but it's definitely not great. Looking at the top, R2, L2, R1, L1, that's how they have them named. They didn't use ZR or anything like that. It's just straight up R1, R2. I don't know why they don't go with that, where they do like ZR, ZL, for example, and R and L. I guess they're just like, it's the shell we have laying around. Just call it R1 and R2. The back buttons are weird because they have this lip here, right, where it's kind of curved to catch your finger if you're pushing on the back, but the button, it resides up here, so you're not going to get a good push at the top here. You're basically going to want to sit like that. Very mushy feeling to it. It's definitely not as good as the Switch Pro controller. L1 and R1 are okay. Again, it's very mushy. Not great feedback when you press it down, but again, it's serviceable for a controller that does everything essentially. It does have motion controls built in, so Splatoon and everything work fine if you want to kind of use the motion controls. And the biggest thing outside of the basic rumble feature that also is in here is the Amiibo support. This will actually work with Amiibos. So why don't we get the Switch and we'll try it out. Now, unfortunately, it does not turn on the Switch. That is one unfortunate thing. You have to actually turn the Switch on and then it will sync up after that. And unfortunately cannot turn the Switch on. And I wish more of them did that, but they just don't for whatever reason. Anyway, we'll go to the settings and controllers and we'll actually test it out. Okay, so here we are at the settings here where you would actually push your Amiibo down on top of your controller. I have the Villager, very very dead-in-the-face villager. At one point, it was really funny, when these first came out, this guy was actually really hard to find, and I just got lucky finding him. And of course, now he's a bit easier to find and everything. Hold Amiibo to the NFC touch point, which is dead center on this one as well. So we're kind of press this guy down, and there it goes. It pops up. This is Pillager, is my Amiibo's nickname. But it does work. So if you want to get a controller that does literally everything that the Pro Controller does, this will actually work. And it's pretty cool to see a controller incorporate NFC at a much lower price of $30. So we're going to go ahead and hit that, and we can actually do it again. We'll drop them on again. And it does take a kind of a second to register it. And you can see it's registering. Hold the Amiibo until it's finished. So I would kind of hold it there. And let me try it again. It does tend to do it at times, and sometimes it'll mess up. But again, for being, there we go, registration complete. So again, for being a third-party one, it's actually not too bad at detecting these Amiibos. As for all the buttons, they do detect okay. Here I am now using the D-pad and going back and forth between the two. It doesn't seem to have any weird presses. You know how with the Switch Pro Controller, if you go back and forth too much, eventually you'll see some ups and downs, for example. It seems to always be up because it always messes people up in Tetris. You always see that. This one doesn't have that quite as much, which is good. So technically, yes, I would say this D-pad is better than the Switch Pro Controller D-pad. A and B are okay. They're not bad, but they definitely don't have the same responsiveness as the Switch Pro Controller. So these are just okay. Again, R and L, R1, L1 work all right, and then ZR and ZL is probably the weakest part of this controller. Plus, minus, everything else is fine. It doesn't seem to pick up turbo, which I wouldn't expect it to. There's our capture button, R and L. So yeah, everything seems to work fine in terms of inputs. And again, the weakest buttons on here are probably R2 and L2. As for weight, let's go ahead and double check. The Switch Pro Controller is right at 250 grams. And if you want to, actually, let me take this guy off, just to give a fair one. This is actually a charger I use from Nyko that actually sits on here, and it sits on an adapter for everyone that asks. It's like their charge bricks. But let me sit on there without it. 245 grams. This is the Xenoblade controller. And then jumping over to this guy, it is 171 grams. So it is lighter, and it does feel lighter, but it still feels rather solid. It just doesn't have the length of the grips at the bottom. So if your hands are a bit bigger, you might feel kind of smushed when using it. Just keep that in mind. All right, let's go and take this guy apart now. It's a couple Phillips head screws on the bottom, so it should come apart pretty easily. These appear to be the same type of screws I deal with a lot of stuff from China, where they're kind of like these basic black Phillips head screws with like a sharp point. Let's get these, how many we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 screws, and then we'll look inside, take a look at the battery and everything else. All right, so it comes right apart. We have our standard rumbles on the bottom. And now that I saw that one that was offset, I always look at them now, and yeah, a lot of them, you're right. You guys called it pretty well, are offset with these weights. We have our full button boards here and everything. The R and L, R1, L1 appear to be hinged at the top. And let's take a quick look at our D-pad and everything. As we can kind of see here is where it would actually press right there. So it is away from that part. Here are all of our buttons and everything here. They're all on like a pretty solid rubber membrane foundation there. Let me go ahead and get this guy apart, as we're mostly looking at our D-pad. That looks pretty solid. And you can kind of see why I wasn't able to hit the up very easily when I was going back and forth. It does have a very large spike in the middle there, as you can kind of see. And that does keep it from accidentally pressing all of them at once. I was still able to push down the middle pretty easily, but it stops it, I guess, just before pressing. There is a large distance between, I would say, the board and the D-pad, as it has to drop all the way down there, but they did make a very long spike, and that appears to be helping. Yeah, it's actually pretty hard to hit all of them at once. So at least the D-pad here, again, a bit better than what we see with something like the standard Pro Controller. Joysticks appear pretty solid here, as they're very, very strong. Again, the dead zone isn't too bad. You can kind of see it if you move it very slightly. You can see a little bit of a wiggle there, but I have to say these joysticks, the joysticks in some of these third-party controllers are actually getting fairly good. The rumbles are the older style rumble motors. It's not HD rumble or anything like that. It's very similar to what you see in like a Xbox One or a PS4 controller, just sitting in the bottom here with like the palm rest, and that's where it'll kind of rumble. And I guess at this point, the board will come right out. So I removed the top board, and it's connected actually to this board with a ribbon cable that goes from here to here. And I guess the battery is actually located underneath of this board, so I guess we'll go ahead and lift this guy out as well. It's interesting, usually the first thing that comes out of these things are generally the battery, but this one, it's like all the way at the bottom here. I kind of wanted to see what size they had in this guy, because they were claiming a 15 to 20 hour battery life, and seeing the actual battery inside and the size will generally tell us if they're kind of close. A lot of times they will go above, like, they'll actually like, I guess go towards the top end of what they can actually do. I guess that's all of the screws, and this board should come out. We also have our LR or ZR at the top here. Let's unscrew these. Okay, so with the board out, the battery is literally stuck to the back here. They use this serious tape to hold it down. That's good, obviously, so it doesn't kind of rattle around in there. Even after being taken apart, it'll just kind of stick back to it. And this is a 500 milliamp hour battery. That should give it a good amount of battery life there. I don't know if it'll get 15 to 20. I'm thinking 10 to 12 is a bit more realistic, and it's still not bad for a third-party Switch controller. But yeah, I don't know about that 15 to 20 they're quoting, especially with these two rumble motors possibly being used the whole time when you're playing a game. I guess if you have them turned off, it won't be as bad, but still, it's definitely not the 15 to 20, I would say. As for how the NFC works on this controller, I took a look around the top board that you would make contact with for an Amiibo to be detected, and on the back I found the trademark design for an NFC antenna. Now, NFC needs to be very close to whatever it is trying to communicate with, and most times manufacturers will use a design where a trace will circle around a board, giving kind of a landing zone essentially, and this is no different. It seems simple enough to incorporate NFC into a controller like this, so I hope other manufacturers do the same, since up until now this functionality has been missing in other off-brand controllers. It's possible that this two-board design is the way to go, and maybe other manufacturers will start to catch on to this going forward. And that's going to do it for the Star Player wireless controller for the Switch. Now, technically it's feature complete. It has rumble, technically not HD rumble, and then it also has NFC Amiibo support, motion controls, and technically all the buttons, as well as a turbo function to it. It's actually not too bad for 30 bucks. And I think we're getting really, really close to there being just a straight up Pro Controller replacement. This is really only missing a few things, which mostly centers around it being able to actually wake the Switch up from sleep, and of course the quote unquote HD rumble. We're very close. We're very close now, and I actually expect a straight-up Pro Controller replacement to probably show up by the end of this year at this point. And I do wish that these grips were a little longer in terms of just for ergonomics, just so it can really give your palms a good spot to really grip. Otherwise, though, it's not a bad pickup if you need another controller, or if your Pro Controller is broken or you don't want to get a Pro Controller because of the pricing. This thing's less than half the price technically at 30 bucks. Not bad. Thanks guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. And get subscribed as we go through more and more Switch controllers, accessories, and some systems I actually have that are going to be coming up as well. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.